Hello, and welcome back to another remarkable chapter of Fear of Imposing in Black Rock City. It's a very hot day. We might get a little rain, but that does not negate the fact that I may be slightly suffering from sunstroke. So today's sponsor is get some shade. Stay in the shade, because I literally cannot even think straight right now because I am quite literally suffering from sunstroke. So, keep in mind while I go through this chapter, if I fumble about, if I say words that don't even make sense, because my brain is all jimble, jamble, jumbalaya right now. And the sun is directly in my goddamn eyeballs, but I'm going to power through. I'm just going to power through, because that's what Burning Man's all about. You just fucking power through that shit. So forgive me. Apologies in advance. Get some fucking shade. Stay in the shade. Don't get sunstroke. It's not good for you. Chapter 3. Damn the mind. Monday, day 1. We awoke in a yurt-turned furnace. The generator broke and the air conditioning was out. Nothing sounded better than an ice-cold screwdriver to start off the day. The citrus tang and bitter aftertaste of cheap vodka would offset the residual delirium from the previous night's narcotic cocktail. However, I hadn't worked my ass off in a kitchen-turned laboratory for no good reason, and the 15 hits of dimethyltryptamine weren't going to smoke themselves. To avoid dosing after any inevitable benders, it was now or never. None of them had taken this substance before, and my precautionary warnings hadn't brought their minds any ease. As someone who's made this stuff for years, squeezed the juice dry, gone too far for the sake of anyone's well-being, and suffered a fair share of psychotic episodes, I'm not one to speak lightly on the molecule, being much quicker to persuade than convince. While that's never stopped me from choking on my own hypocrisy, if it's my mind to lose, that's my business. I'm a prime example of do as I say, not as I do. But if seeking to imitate one's behavior, it's best to heed the warnings. I don't wish to deviate from the story, but I will say this. While DMT may be considered a birthright to be shared and received with the purest of intentions, it's certainly not safe for everyone. There are some minds of which, once ripped apart, cannot be stitched back together. So, to anyone out there who may be dealing this stuff in vape pens to kids at music festivals who are barely old enough to buy cigarettes, let alone board flights to the astral plane, I'd very much like to express, fuck you, you rat bastard pieces of shit. In my humble opinion, scumbags who sell DMT to profit off kids who are curious yet ill-equipped, undeveloped, and uninformed should be hung up, tarred, and feathered for their psychological crimes against humanity. Chief, Sleazy, and Lone Wolf would participate with a question in mind, and while detail of their aggressive mental voyage isn't necessary, their messages were received loud and clear. After some two-way tickets to the nether of one's soul and back, it was time to start the day. As a licensed finagler, Sleazy ventured off to find help with the generator while we partook in other affairs. Lone Wolf had no interest in tripping after such a profound experience. However, Chief and I have a wicked tendency to redline our engines, even whilst stuck in first gear, never being able to keep from peeking over the fence. We hadn't eaten since the night before, having known that if to really kick the tires and light the fires, we should take the shrooms before lunch. At the time, we hadn't been keen on caution, so we reached into the sack and grabbed 2 handfuls, having easily thrown back 8 grams each. There's no point in trying to race a drug. Odds are, you're bound to lose. But the senseless thing is, no matter how many times one learns this fact the hard way, you still try and try again. Within 10 minutes of preparing a meal we'd never eat, the wave gained dangerous momentum. In our malnourished bodies, the mucks were being digested at a mutated speed. I could barely formulate a coherent sentence, let alone be bothered to assemble a grilled cheese sandwich. Chief was staring blankly at me, but there was some sort of psychic understanding between us at that point. If we didn't blow dodge before that wave barreled over, we'd sooner find ourselves melted onto the very hot plate I stood before. Everything was being communicated telepathically as we grabbed a single jug of water, took to our bikes, and left for nowhere fast. Heed this advice. If bound to lose your shit, pack the right shit to lose beforehand. I've always found that the faster speed is kept moving forward while under the influence, the less likely one might succumb to being absolutely floored by a drug. After a couple of hours aimlessly wandering, the wave broke and receded into calm waters. That isn't an appropriate way to put it. Everything was breathing to the size of a hot air balloon, and the dry lake bed was more reminiscent of mountainous sand dunes primed for avalanche. Yet nothing was more distracting than the conflict in which the Rebel Alliance and Galactic Empire were currently waging up in the midday sky, as if things weren't bizarre enough out here. There's truly no place in the world like Burning Man. One could be sober as a southern judge and still feel to be tripping their grandmother's tits off. From the narwhals on unicycles to the 2-story tall working phonograph placed suspiciously, nothing makes any sense to the rational mind. But the moment Chief regained some clarity, he began flicking at the veins. "Holy shit," he said. "Almost forgot about the weed." He'd packed a single bowl to smoke when the right time arose, and the right place was found. But where amongst the madness was an intimate area? It had to be the perfect spot for such a monumentous occasion, though we knew little of it then. Everything felt bizarre and out of place, as if pedaling on an endless loop where time stretched in several different directions. We'd find a clearing with no one in sight and take a seat. Then a strong gust of wind would engulf us in dust and settle to reveal the materialization of a mirage over the course of a second. Suddenly, dozens of people occupied the vicinity, and that 25-foot-tall wooden owl of which was football fields away just moments ago was now casting its shadow directly behind us. "What the hell is going on here?" Chief muttered. "I haven't the slightest fucking clue," I replied. "And to be quite honest, I've been afraid to ask. It could just be the mushrooms, but I do believe we've entered some kind of deceitful temporal anomaly. The very same people seem to have come and gone many times now." "A bit suspect, huh? This spot isn't safe, but don't reckon many are." These portals we'd step between didn't cease, and each revealed different planes of existence. I tried documenting the observations, but every time my notebook was opened, it looked as if falling victim to a psychotic episode. Hieroglyphics were scratched into pages as if written with talons. Like a child's diner placemat, pictures drawn outside the lines with half-snapped Crayola crayons. Stick figures etched by a traumatized orphan on peyote buttons. Why are so many of these sentences upside down? I wondered. My mind became a clown car ripping donuts, but all the doors were open and everything was spilling out in absurd fashion. We began commenting in half-jest how this bowl is going to change everything. But in growing tired of looking for a perfect spot, we'd find ourselves sprawled across the floor in exhaustion, the shrooms having dematerialized us into dust. The less forward momentum being exerted, and the more sedentary we became, the deeper the rabbit hole was dug. Each moment spent in harrowing stillness, I'd lose more of my mind to the great expanse of a tunneling reality. My striped pants became stretching lanes to a nightmarish highway, aching for a 10-car pileup. They had loops like a Hot Wheels track which led to my red, high-top PF Flyers. Their vibrance was dialed far too high, and the white soles made it seem I had Saturns for feet. I'm a very vascular person, and now it looked like each arm was wrapped in tangled poison ivy. Chief didn't appear any less strange. My body may have been a circus, but with his inflating utility vest and gear, I was more inclined to believe him an astronaut with many sets of eyes, and spiraling antennae growing from his bucket hat lined with sage bundles. If we truly were on another planet, within a different dimension, who was to say this odd insectoid sitting next to me hadn't in fact been an actual Martian? Had the onlookers drawing nearest to this unraveling metamorphosis taken notice of the invasion? Give me 1 second, everyone. I have sunscreen oozing into my eyeballs. It is oozing. It is quite literally oozing into my eyeballs, and it stings. My eyes are on fire. Where am I? Drug-induced paranoia can spiral violently out of control. There was no doubt we'd already been put on a watch list. Wanted posters were made. Amber alerts were dispatched. And those undercover government agents dressed in tutus and crop tops would be throwing a goddamn net over us at any second, only to drag us back to their lab, slice us open, peel back our skin, study our insides, and harvest our organs to make trillions off a cure for some terminal illness left unaffordable to the poor folks of poverty who rave for a just healthcare system. We couldn't let that happen. Not now. Not again. "Wow, things sure are dusty," Chief yelled before whispering to me. "Act natural. Smile and wave. Smile and wave." Anyone know how to get to that place?" I chimed. It was a godsend to have some passerby tip his hat and proclaim, "Carry on, fellas." The more we'd been stopped from smoking that dreadful flower, the more we laughed of its importance, and the more we understood that something much bigger was taking place. A sick and cosmic kind of joke, being delivered from the universe itself, and we'd soon wind up on the shit end of a wicked punchline. What started as an aimless adventure was now an epic quest, in search of land sacred enough to light the holiest of holy smokes. We needed space to sit quietly, peacefully, in an impossibly loud place. Hungry animals with pent-up sexual frustration had all escaped their cages, and the zoo became a dangerous feeding ground of deviancy. Even upon such vast expanse, I'd never felt my personal space so violated. We'd spot a mountain in the distance and, like Moses, knew we'd have to travel to the outskirts of the desert. If there's one thing I've learned over years of walkabouts while under the influence, it's that one must never trust their perception of what's believed within reason when it comes to distance measured. That thing or place believed to be just over yonder never is. However, this understanding hadn't stopped us, having been dead set on reaching that peak. We rode towards the mountain until finding ourselves at the end of the party. They call it the trash fence. A 3-foot plastic netting of which encompasses Burning Man as perimeter and garbage catcher. Just beyond is where the cops roam, zooming at 100 miles per hour to make sure no uninvited guests get in and no partiers get out. You are never to cross over, for it is forbidden. Although this rule in and of itself was trying to control our rights in freedom. To our warped state of mind, those rat bastards were trying to keep us locked up. "I'm an American, goddammit!" Chief yelled. "My granddaddy didn't fight for his life in the trenches just for this fucking fence to stand in our way of that mountain." "You're absolutely right," I replied. "For this to stop us would be to spit on his grave. We shan't show such disrespect. Not today, not ever." We'd need at least 1,000 yards between us and anything comprised of physical matter if to feel the least bit comfortable. In such a mindset, telling someone they aren't allowed to do something only fuels that primal urge to rebel in defiance. We weren't here to conform, adhere, or fall in line, nor had we been standing before a measly trash-collecting fence, but a symbol of all that was wrong in an unjust world and rotten society crumbling in on itself. The only logical course of action, and God-given right, was to in fact leave Burning Man and step into the vast beyond, too ill to stay and just sane enough to disobey. We looked both ways, tossed over our trusty steeds, and rode for the horizon as liberated men in search of answers wildly unprepared to receive. We rode for some time before Chief realized that the mountain had to be an additional 10 miles out. We were delusional, having no idea how far we'd come, nor the measures willing to take. It was rational thinking of which very likely saved our lives. If truly seeking to find ourselves there, we'd sooner die than return. Burning Man is not an environment to underestimate. Black Rock Desert is a harsh climate and relentlessly unforgiving. Just because it's a party, you're not immune to dehydration, heat stroke, or being trampled by an art car. Being aware of the surroundings and one's resources on hand is paramount. After all, people perish out there a lot less stupefied than we were. We sat down to face the majestic mountain, taking a moment of silence to admire the seemingly hopeless, overambitious task we'd been appointed. Two boys could dream, but sometimes it's safer otherwise. "It's time," I muttered. "Everything has led us here. Once again, neglecting to consider the consequential spell of spoken word. Our mantra, "This is going to change everything," was an ongoing goof, yet never took the severity of that statement to heart. He handed me the pipe of Lucifer's pubic hair, and as I fixated on its weight, I believe a part of me knew better. Asking a substance to "show me what you've got" isn't a wise choice, lest prepared to unequivocally lift the veil on one's deepest fears. I'd never been so naive in misunderstanding of something so incredibly powerful within my hands, as if the years spent traversing the infinite realms of DMT left me painfully misled. The poignance of deep psychedelic prowess and the wisdom once retained became mere folly to a feeble mind. I raised it to my lips and inhaled deeply, then passed it to Chief. He took an equal pull, then immediately projectile vomited all over himself and passed the pipe back without speaking. In taking it, I stopped to meet his eyes, watching as a gaze of reverence became that of utter fear. There was a rapid onset of panic, approaching in the rearview mirror like a Mack truck. This choice was a terrible mistake, and what was sown shall be reaped. "We must get back immediately," I whimpered. "How's the water looking?" "Not good," he replied. "A quarter gallon. We've got to be miles from the fence." It quickly dawned on us that it took some time to get here, and as our brains began sliding from each ear, it'd take a miracle to get back in one piece. The happy-go-lucky mushroom ride ended, now warping into some raped sideways birth child of peyote and salvia. By approach to the fence, the gargantuan rogue wave had barreled over and dragged us out to a maddening rip current. Hopping over was like crossing into perdition. This dangerous concoction was holding us captive, and we'd given our full consent. I feel it imperative to express that the bicycle I'd been riding could hardly be classified as one. It was a low-riding chopper for children with ambitions for the Hells Angels, but for a fully grown adult, an improbable prerequisite. I was 2 times too tall and had to hunch over with my knees kicked out to pedal pigeon-toed, having no business riding it sober on the physical plane, let alone the metaphysical. That said, all rights to motor function were forfeited to a higher power. I was no longer behind the wheel, but forced into being an observer of these terrible past, present, and future realities. We were still some ways from camp, but as far and fast as we'd ride, nothing got any closer. This place was purgatory masquerading as a party, a rather sadistic karmic hamster wheel of perpetuating sorrow. As if the mental entwinement wasn't enough to break our will, the environment wasn't doing us any favors. Temperatures were soaring, and I could feel the sun's rays molting each layer of my exposed skin like a bearded dragon. I was gasping for air, my teeth being caked with dust. It felt like gumming cheap, stepped-on blow at the local dive. "I need water," Chief shouted as we came to a screeching halt. "It's getting really dark, man," I replied. "I know. Just bury it deep. We have to keep going." It may have been high noon, but our minds had become a pitch black, spiraling abyss. We looked at each other with such tragic desperation, desiring nothing more than to just bawl like babies. I've suffered a monstrously cruel life, of which I wouldn't wish upon the vilest of souls. And those pains, fears, turmoil, and anguish were now breaching the shallows of my suppressed self-loathing. As we pressed on, something began happening that I'd never experienced in a trip thus far, nor ever since, having embodied the people of my past who'd brought that torture upon me. I watched, felt, and lived it, driving fists drenched in hatred onto the child within, the boy longing to be loved. And as I delivered that brutalizing abuse against my will, I could sense the agony brought upon that child as he'd plead for release. I felt to live centuries in the shoes of those monstrous people until finally becoming the man who raised me, the very root of my undoing. Over and over and over, I'd call on myself with his name, one dragged through the blood of innocence. I knew with every beat of my lifeless heart that I was him, that he was me. I felt every ounce of pain he'd ever delivered upon another, every manipulation, lie, scream, and harrowing fit of unadulterated rage. I felt these attributes of misery within him, as him, and then underwent the excruciating torment of every victim he'd plague with his disease. I was malice. I was ruination. I was evil incarnate. And yet, putting it that way still feels inadequate. I began taking notice of other people passing us, only they weren't strangers. They became the faces of those who chose to deliver pain upon the boy. And within their eyes I could see their lives unfold from start to finish in the span of a single second to the timeless infinite. I'd watch as they too were brutally hurt as children until the vicious cycle perpetuated, and victim became the inevitable abuser. I felt everything, where they'd been, who they loved, the tears they shed, but above all else, the pain they caused. Aside from the duration of lives, if looking to an art car, I could see the roads each tire had traveled, feel the speeds they'd driven, and smell the rubber they'd burned. When looking to structures, I could see as the 2x4s were once seeds which grew to be trees, and the peaceful life they'd lived prior to being cut, harvested, and shaped into beautiful art. Whether alive or inanimate, everything had a life which unraveled before me, and a story to tell. I was a floating ball of dark matter, wisping across the desert floor to absorb every ounce of pain the surrounding souls had to offer. I'd stopped Chief for the jug, only now, with each sip and droplet of water, I could see the entire world within it, slowly trickling down the back of my throat. Pin-sized planets of peril, with the capacity for infinite torment, made their way into the endless void of my physical being. I watched as I'd repeatedly fall from my body, back into my fucking body, having been consumed by paralleling universes of eternal damnation. This is it, I thought. I'm dead and was plunged headfirst into the bowels of hell. I'd taken a long walk off a very short pier, but Jesus H. fucking Christ, was it ever so unbelievably worth it? As undeniably painful this experience was, I knew what it had to show me was something remarkably beautiful. The mushroom wasn't trying to hurt me. This deep-seated emotional pain was one of the greatest lessons ever bestowed. I'd crossed into the furthest reaches of the bardo to gain insight on the malevolent corruption which stems behind true, concentrated evil. Not some abstract, instrumental, or metaphorical ideology, but evil bent on malicious intent. To understand the depths in which I'd been affected by it. This lesson erased a filter of judgment in its totality, having revealed new layers of empathy which baptized me of hatred and resentment. For a moment in time, I discovered true peace within an insufferable chaos. And as for that sad little boy, his childhood may have been taken from him, but I've since taken that shit back. I'd often glance over to Chief, and while the battle he'd been waging was his own, we'd been parallel to one another nonetheless. Up until that point, we weren't best friends, hadn't known each other long, nor related over anything other than radical drug consumption. But when I looked into his eyes now, there were roots which grew much deeper than friendship, flesh, or blood. The bond being formed was tethered to a brotherhood of cosmic connection, having become family of the soul. That weed really had changed everything. I've done more mind-altering drugs than the average bear, and have pushed the psyche into far-reaching places dangerously close to never returning. I do not, in any way whatsoever, condone our recklessness that day. We were dumb kids with an internal savagery, and have come a long, long way since then. Psychedelics have no brakes, nor a failsafe. Take too much, and you're quite literally dangling upon the world's highest slack line with no net. These are very, very dangerous grounds to tread upon for the psyche, and not for the faint of heart or mind. But with all things considered, if you do decide to rid your wits at Burning Man, I suggest getting it done and over with sooner rather than later. Day one works wonderfully. That way, for the rest of the week, you'll have nothing left to lose, and only the entire fucking world to gain. Whoa, that was a fun one. I wonder where this mustard mystery man and his buddy Chief went. Somewhere out there, surely. I'm just glad they made it back. Because frankly, that whole situation doesn't look good. I got sunstroke today just sitting at camp. God only knows what would happen if I ventured that way like mustard mystery man. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for joining me today. I had a lot of fun, even though my brain was a little jimble, jamble, jumbalaya brain. But I'm really excited for next time. Can't wait to read another wonderful chapter of Fear of Imposing in Black Rock City. Thank you.